full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello. Hi there, and welcome to our virginal edition, or our first edition of this Education Tonight on StreamYard. So third type of thing we've done, Adam, isn't it, for Teachers Talk Radio?
So we've fulfilled our roster of Podbean, Twitter, and now we're live actually in the flesh, which is really good. And welcome to this first Education Tonight. We've got a busy show. We've got 3 big topics to kick off with tonight, Brent. And we're also very happy that we continue with John Catt supporting us. So I'll just say a quick hello to John before we kick off tonight's show.
Hi, John.
Hi, John. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? You can visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional developments. Today, happy reading. So we're off on half term, so we thought we'd give this a go. My celebrity spot this week was a quick bump into the Archbishop of Canterbury on Easter Sunday, which is a bump into and a half actually on that on Easter Sunday. But I believe you had your own shock with a text coming through just before someone was live on TV as well, Brent. Were you on holiday?
Yeah, I was literally getting to the airport and I got a message from Daniel Kebedy about this show actually, and I will get Daniel on at some stage. And an answer to the question, and the answer was, of course, are unions political? That's the question we're asking. Or should unions be involved in political affairs? And literally, as the weirdest thing was, as I was about to leave my father's kitchen and get a lift up to the airport to go home, from home, Daniel appears on BBC. So he texted me just before he went on to BBC, and obviously very, very pleased that he was able to keep an eye on what we're doing. And equally, his take on the fact of the matter is that the union is driven by the members, for the members, and that if the union is political, it is because of the membership, and that the motions in conference come from, again, the membership. And certainly I kind of agree with him to that extent, because I'm not a big fan of this whole union baron thing where, certain unions seem to be, I think it's the legacy of the Arthur Scargill days when you had union barons. But looking at the democratic nature of most trade unions now, they have executive committees, they have grassroots, and they are voted in. So certainly that's where we're going to go with this first sort of story is, obviously, where are we with regards to the unions, and certainly the discussion about how political the union should be. And of course, we are living in a time now when we have a thing called polarization. Now, I understand polarization. I was born into a society of polarization, and them and us are, that kind of conflict situation. So I've had a head start to what's currently happening in society, seeing exactly how, you get one or the other. And you get people who will always say one or the other. And you and I had a chat about this, about what is the purpose and the function of trade unions. I could spend this whole hour giving a history lecture in political discourse in Britain. In fact, it is one of the units I teach at GCSE history, from Magna Carta right through to the English Civil War, right through to the Diggers, right through to all the political movements, the suffragists, the suffragettes, the civil rights movement. My parents were civil rights activists in the 60s, demanding one person, one vote. And I myself am a proud trade unionist. So I have my own in unconscious biases on this. Or, well, let's be honest with you, they're not very unconscious.
They're quite out there.
But I'm unusual in that I will express my opinions and be damned for it. And I'm not about to hold my opinions in. But I would fully expect, again, with the children I teach, I tell them why I think what I think. But I tell them why I think that way. It's important that we understand the formulaic nature of why people have opinions. I can sit down with anybody from a completely different political discourse and discuss issues, because that's what I want. I want discussion. You want debate. I'm a child of Socrates. I love discussion. I love debates. I'm going to say it. I actually love a good argument, as long as it's done in a consensual way, and as long as it's done in a way where you can thrash things out. But I do like the whole rough and tumble of discussion, debate, and that's one of the brilliant things about working with young people. And one of our stories later on we're going to look at is the shutting down of debate, because people are playing it safe because they don't want to be accused of being cancelled or causing offence or falling foul of legislation that is not there. In other words, there's another news story we'll talk about later on about people playing it safe and teachers not engaging in issues such as, which we're going to discuss now. So that's where we're going to go with this. We're going to look at.
So maybe let's have a look at the different camps, because rightly people join unions for lots of different reasons. There's obviously there's a younger generation that's been brought up in a less kind of unionized world who are joining teaching that are not so necessarily ready to sign up to the unions straight away. There's the group that are signing up for an insurance policy, maybe for a free gift, maybe for some discounts on some things. That's fair enough. There's another area where people kind of want to be kind of involved in kind of certain issues, and then there are people who are left wing or trade unionists, I guess, who have then found themselves as a teacher kind of later on. And I guess these days we'd call them the more militant side. But I guess when we started teaching, that was the majority of teachers. That kind of broad spectrum, has to be, as always, welcome to sign up for whatever reason they need to sign up. We need, a balance and a cross, reference of society in a kind of group. But is that why the unions are particularly kind of in a difficult situation at the minute? With, do they take certain issues? Are they a bit like the Labour Party in some respect? Are they expected by some parts of the trade union to be more forceful on certain issues, and then other groups are saying, well, hang on a minute, that's not what your job is. Your job is to look after us if an accusation is raised against us.
Yeah, I mean, is that thing of what do you want from your trade union? Yeah. And for me personally, like everything else, if you don't engage in your trade union, then what do you expect? And I'm not a big fan of the whole kind of blame the leadership. A union works because it's collective action. You're in it together. I mean, I went on a union course recently, and they had a special sort of like, this is your union rep type. And I have a special union rep type. I do it all for my colleagues. Too quick to kind of solve the problems, a bit like the A team. So I'm one of those guys that, I'm the union, the mini union baron of the school. And that's where and the thing is, I was only one on the picket line when we went on strike, because I sent everybody else home and says, right, on you go home, on we go. You paid for this day. And because I take that burden, there are other unions reps who are more, what's the word for it, collegiate, in a sense that they share the responsibilities around. I've asked for more help from some of my colleagues to actually step up and help me out. And that's the thing, I find myself getting more drawn into union politics because I just simply don't have the time. And that's the thing, that's the honest answer. The majority of teachers just don't have the time to engage in union politics because, look at the conference at the moment. You have to invest money, time, effort. Being a union reps voluntarily, and you look at it takes time. You go to your local meetings, your branch meetings. It's a lot of investment in time and effort to be a union rep. And some people, that's for them, and they see themselves, once they start going down that union path, they sort of get suckered into that, and they get training through it, and they become, I'm not saying politicized, but they become more involved, don't they? And that's the same with political parties. Work exactly the same way. I'm both a member of a political party and the union, and a union officer, and I find the parallels between the two are striking. The parallels are also striking in the sense that you will get people complain about the union or complain about the direction of a political party. But the thing of it is, we vote for the executive. We vote for local officers, and you look at the voting rates, they're pretty low.
Yeah.
And yet you will get people then saying it's not my union. Well, it becomes your union if you get more engaged. Same as 40% of people don't vote in general elections and yet will complain. So my message to people is that you get the union that you get because you have 500,000 people in the union. We did a strike ballot recently and we just got over 50% on the largest union. The NASUWT didn't even get close to that. Now you can take that two ways. You can say to yourself, people aren't bothered, or you can say that we were saying that you just don't believe it's their responsibility, or they pay their dues. It's the union. What I get somebody come up to me and goes to me, what is the union doing about that? And I look at him and I've started to say to them, what are you doing about that? You're the union too. Because they look at me as like I'm Bea Baracus or Hannibal, or face man, or more like the crazy guy, crazy fool. That's what am I doing about it?
In your opinion, are unions doing enough really to kind of reach out to members and properly explain what they are doing? What does Daniel Kebede do day to day? Does anyone know? Does anyone get a feeling for what that job is or what that role is, or
Again, you get people criticizing the union when they text every week and say, I'm sick of the union texting me, and yet you can't win. You cannot win one way or the other. It's the porridge test. You'll get people saying the union's too political. And the thing of it is, a union has to be a political beast, because its job is to lobby the political establishment to nudge and to influence political discourse. Now, of course, the NEU is a non-affiliated union, but I had a bone to pick with them come the last general election because it was plainly obvious they were favouring one political party over others. And I was a member of that, not a member of that political party. And I felt a little bit of, I got a phone call actually from one of the union reps up north saying, are you going to put pressure as a union rep on your local political candidates? Of which I replied, well, I am one of the local political candidates, so do you want me to put pressure on myself? And then I saw a leaflet come through, and the leaflet had, what percentage of political candidates had responded to a campaign about funding cuts. And it was that they hadn't asked me. They hadn't actually. I was really, really almost humiliated. I got straight on the phone and went, what are you doing? That's not fair. It's not fair. Don't do that. We're meant to be an apolitical, non-aligned union, then be an apolitical, non-aligned union. However, let's be frankly honest, put the cards on the table. The majority of the NEU is to the left of the political spectrum. And there is, like every other, situation, same as the Labour Party, same as Lib Dems, you have factions, you have different factions in different directions. Daniel Kebede was elected by the NEU left, and people could criticise that. But where is the NEU centre? Where's the NEU right? That's a large group, and he got the membership who were organised at grassroots level voted for him. Now you cannot disrespect democracy there. That's the democracy he was voted in. And any criticism is directed towards him. Well, I'm sorry, but then put a candidate up, and that's my take on many things. Put a candidate up next time that will run on a different agenda. If you don't want the union to be political, then run a candidate who is going to take the union in different directions. And again, remember that it is an executive group, and when you see those envelopes coming into the home, for executive officers, branch secretaries, all of those, I wonder how low the voting rates are. And you can say, what should the union do to engage people? I could say the same thing about political parties. When you look at the number of people who are members, the Conservative Party, 150,000 members, how many of them actually voted Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss? We're talking 60 to 70,000 people who were actually deciding the destiny of this country.
Yeah.
So it's pretty low percentage. Even when it comes to a general election, the political party that wins the general election gets 30 to 40% of the 60% of the votes that you get. Yeah. So it's easy to criticize a democratic institution like unions without engaging that democratic institution like unions. Yeah. And that's
okay. The wider question is, though, for example, should the NEU have a stance on, say, the crisis, the war in Palestine, or the crisis in Palestine? Should it have a status on the war in Ukraine? Should it have a status on kind of child poverty? Should it have, where are the, because you could see, for example, that some of those things are going to have a direct relation to education. Mm. Some maybe have a more indirect, and some maybe not so much. But should a union always be able to, have a statement on those things as a kind of almost like a public body where people are going to receive communication from? Would there be a PR team expecting them to have it? And we can see here Kevin and Kevin's tweet that's on the screen now. And should they be kind of seen, I guess, or in the media with certain political groups, or should they be a bit more unbiased because their members might be coming from all sorts of different persuasions and political groups?
I mean, you're asking the question: what group should they choose to invite to their conference? But you look at the eclectic set of groups that they do. There was the free food, I think, kitchens that were outside, and they were given free school meals. So there was a charity giving free school meals who they sponsored. You can see there that Kevin Courtney, that the ambassador to Palestine, was invited to the conference and spoke at the conference.
The free food one has a direct link, doesn't it, to education? That because schools do give food to all the schools that I've been in do something because of children on free school meals. So you can see there's like a direct impact there.
But criticizing that is criticizing the government, though, and that takes you into the sphere of politics.
I guess they can choose whether to use that as a way to invite public debate on a certain issue or not. But they could also just invite a group to basically say what the current issues are within the education sector.
Yes.
You don't always have to be political, do you, on that? You can just state the situation.
But here's the rub. Trade unions have always had opinions beyond their remit, because if you look at where trade unions began, they began as organizations who were intent on workers' rights. Now, again, if you look at the makeup of the majority of people in trade unions, and I am going to make a generalization, that those who are active are more of the left, and the left being more internationalist does tend to be less nationalist, and therefore sees a child in another country that's starving as a child in another country that's starving, and as a teacher in a country. Doesn't matter that that country is not the same country. It is literally, if you look at the psychological makeup of a lot of teachers, they are people who are do-gooders by definition. If you look at that, and therefore
it's altruism, isn't it? We know there's a kind of link to altruism there. However, when there are kind of seemingly in the country divisionable politics, like for example, should the NEU have had like a stance on Brexit?
Well, they could have a stance on Brexit from the point of view of the Erasmus and the educational.
But that's fine, isn't it? They can make their point to say that we would lose. But
half the country, here's your problem: half the country, and a lot of your members are, and this is where you're never going to satisfy everybody. But that's the same in everything, aren't you? Because same as when I voted in conference in my political party, there, on NATO. So the Green Party, for instance, was having a vote on NATO. I didn't agree with the answer that came up, but I have to respect the will of that majority, and that's up to. And it goes back to that union thing. If members of the union are so upset, disgusted with some of the union stances on things, then they choose to leave the union, or they engage in union politics, of which then they get a candidate who reflects their views, and they get elected, of which then the union. So I'm of the kind of, instead of criticizing, I would like to change from within inside.
Yeah.
And that's how unions can be directed and changed by the large group of people who would say, and that's how lobbying works. Inside all political movements and unions, there is, as I say, these factions, and if they feel strongly enough about it, they gather the numbers and they change the direction of it.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is, right at the beginning, I said there could be as much as kind of a 25% group of people that are just, as you said, just paying their fees. This is an insurance company. Oh, cool! I get like 20% off at this company, so why not? If anything goes wrong, I've got a bit of a backup. But hang on a minute, this organisation is now saying that. I don't think they should be saying that. I don't want to be associated with that. I don't want to be political. I don't want to be engaged with this. So therefore, now I'm kind of You know, I'm going to criticize because the thing that I thought that I was signing up for is now doing something else, has now become political. Because now,
every time I've spoken to union officers and said they get upset when they believe that the function of a union is an insurance policy.
Yeah.
Because the whole concept of union, even the word union, is a collective action, is the large group of people will achieve a lot more than an individual. And that by coming together collectively, engaging, debating, discussing, which is happening at a conference. When you look at the size of that conference, actually, it's larger than some political conferences. The motions that are passed as well. It is effectively following the same model as a political party, but much like a political party, I know that there are some, Tom's come up, I'll answer that in a second. There are some within who would say, well, that's what I don't pay for my union for that. But then they would still come to the union and look for other things. So it's just, you have to compromise with that sometimes. And that's, if you don't want union protection, this is what you get when you're in a union. You aren't a part of a union. And the idea of being part of a union is that, again, with strike action, the NEU went 8 days on strike. The majority of their members stood together in solidarity. So it is a socialist ideal. It is an ideal of the left. And as we well know, that people can disagree. So Tom's, for instance, says, question for both of you.
Lovely segue.
Do you agree with the NEU fringe position that funding should be cut for Ukrainian armaments? So he's just loved a hand grenade in there. Honestly speaking, it doesn't matter what I think about that situation. I wouldn't have created that situation in the first place because I wouldn't be militarizing in the first place. So for me, it's closing the stable door when the horse is bolted. But as a child of a person who grew up in a conflict situation, an escalation of a conflict situation, I can tell you that we are further on down the line, and I called this from the very start, that we need to negotiate a position. So I agree to a certain extent that we should have a position of more neutrality rather than a position that I would believe could escalate the situation and draw conflict out further. And if anyone wants to say I'm a pacifist in that, then they can more than welcome to discuss that. But at the same time, I don't agree that that comes across very badly. And I think from some of the tweets, I think we've got a tweet from an individual there who within the union posted up one of the union websites saying, well, I'm actually currently, teaching and educating children who are refugees from the Ukraine. So I have my heart and my head on this. Would I want a country to have national self-determination to defend itself? Absolutely. You're talking to an Irishman who's had 900 years of colonialism from a next door neighbor. Let's be honest about that. But back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, my people weren't called that. We were called other things. But I find it quite upsetting that people didn't defend the national self-determination of my people, but yet will defend the self-determination of the Ukraine. And then when it comes to Palestine and Israel, there seems to be double standards. So it's a very difficult thing. You're trying to negotiate that in a very, very strange position in the world we live in because it's nuanced. But people don't want nuanced. People want, what side do you want? Where are you with this? Are you with them or us? And I'm not with neither. I'm with the people on both sides. I'm with that 17-year-old Russian kid who's been drafted, who has no idea where the hell Ukraine is, who's taken over by Putin and trucked into the deep end with people he doesn't want to shoot a gun against. I'm with the Ukrainians who are having missiles rained down on them. So geopolitically speaking, if the NEU is trying to de-escalate, then I understand whether, but at the same time, I can see how that is perceived and that could be considered as an own goal. However, in 2003, I stood with 1 million people and I marched with the Stop the War Coalition and I marched with the NEU to stop the war in Iraq. And I felt then, as I feel now, that that was an escalation that didn't have to happen and history has proven correct. So it is easy in the moment now to say what we should be doing. It takes a braver person to actually break ranks. And I think the union's being brave in some aspects, but at the same time, they're creating this discussion, aren't they? Is it the union's position?
That's the difficult thing. I mean, there's a difference, I think, in kind of having a debate and then making a kind of stance that you kind of then vote on. Tom's just said it. Have you seen that? He thought you called him Diana Ross at one point during that. I can confirm. We'll have a look at the transcript later, but I don't think Diana Ross came out.
No. I think it's the union's position to debate things. I think they should debate things. I think it's a safe space to debate things.
But should there again, like we're trying to do tonight, Is it also the conferences? Should they also be putting in balance there? Is there balance in those debates?
I would hope that there is.
Or is it a bit more one-sided, or is it kind of almost pre-decided that this is what we think you should be kind of looking at? Here's such and such from this group.
It shouldn't be pre-decided. Again, it should be grassroots and it should be democratically led. Same as my own political party. I don't agree with NATO, but my political party's changed its stance on NATO. Am I going to leave my political party because of that? Am I going to throw the dummy out with it and spit my dummy out? No, I'm going to work within that to change that policy back to a policy I agree with. But that's compromise. That's politics. That's discussion. That's debate. That's healthy. It's when you shut that down and say, you want to create that narrative of you're them or you're us, or if you don't agree with the policy on Ukraine, oh, you're a Russian imperialist. I'm sorry, no, I'm no Russian imperialist, but I'm no individual that doesn't look into what's going on and say to myself, what this course of action will lead to causality, and causality will lead to a set of consequences, and those consequences in turn will lead to consequences. And as a child of history and as a person who studies it, I can tell you that courses of action have led to bigger issues geopolitically. And I think it is within the union's remit to be able to do that. And that, because it is what unions do. Unions are political in their construct. They have been and have been since they came about. We wouldn't have had all the things that the working day, week, maternity leave, all those workers' rights that we've had. And in fact, what I'm seeing is now a kind of comeback to unions. If you think about it, there's a re-energizing of unions in the last 5-6 years. And again with COVID, people ran back to unions because when you take away leaving the European Union, talk about leaving the European Court of Human Rights, you talk about stripping away our rights at this, that, the other. I mean, what have you got left? But some people are coming back to unions because they're realizing the collective security is better. Which, coming to that point about Ukraine, collective security, if you work together with other people and you compromise and you work together with other countries, you should be strong. This idea of isolationism, which is nationalism, is not healthy. Nationalism from us and nationalism from Russia, it's not healthy.
I'm going to just call time slightly on this because we're already halfway through the show, Brent. This is where the hour is going to be very tight for us, I think, to try and get these issues. Yeah. We did put a poll up on Twitter and to the question that should they be debating non-educational issues, and 68% said no, 32% said yes. So heavily in favour there of no, they should be focusing on educational issues or those that have a direct impact on education. I'll give you 2 minutes just to quickly update us on what's happening at conference right now. You just want to quickly cover that, Brent?
Yep, so National Campaign for Support Staff and Equal Rights, that was motion 14. So there's quite a lot on this conference about support staff and about uplifting support staff, and they've passed a couple of good motions there to recognise, and I think that's something I massively agree with, because we have a crisis in teaching, but we have a massive crisis in support staff as well. We had SATs as well. I think this is an absolute, it's a shoe-in, but we have passing motion 11, which is the abolition of SATs. Again, I completely agree with that from my own personal experience with my own child about over-examined children and mental health. So that's gone into policy, and that was motion 11. That passed as well. Inclusive curriculum for all, that was motion 10. A modern engaging curriculum. So again, all very relevant. These are the motions that are passing. If you look at the motions that are passing, are very different to this idea of the geopolitical discussions which are happening more at fringes. So the bread and butter stuff is happening. And what else that we have? And we had the big news today, which is the big news was the indicative ballot that the membership would like the union to wait until the government publishes its pay body and see what that pay review says before then, if not accepting that, returning to a formal ballot. So there's a pause at the moment to ball back in the government's court, but quite a lot of discussion from some of my insiders at the conference. There was quite a bit of a split between that of what do we do next? What does the union do next after the just over 50% turnout and a 90% yes of the 50% turnout, which was about 10% down on last time. There was an element of, is it strike fatigue. What do we do next? And that's what they've decided, which I think is a reasonable course of action.
I said last time, it felt for a lot of people that there was like and I understand the reasons why, but it felt like there was a lot of striking last time for a little gain. That I know people that work in other public sector jobs who almost got exactly the same pay rise, and there was no strike action. So it'd be interesting if that also has an impact on people's decisions, and they're kind of taking that into account as well.
I think that the idea that the government this idea that came out about sustainable return to a sustainable pay for teachers was said by Gillian Keegan, and then in the same breath, the next day we have £8 billion worth of tax cuts because the economy is doing brilliant. You're like, hold on a second here. Yeah. That doesn't wash with us. And of course, we know the recruitment retention issue. But there is that fatigue within the teaching profession. There is, we are struggling with the day-to-day, the bread and butter. We don't get to discuss these bigger geopolitical issues because we're too busy, with our glue sticks, or who's got a teaching assistant, or the 500 kids you have to teach the multiple subjects. Maslow hierarchy of discussions, our pay goes further on down the list. And that's one of the weaknesses of this, is that paying conditions. I've recently surveyed my own members to see what is the thing that's irking them the most. And 60% of them says it's behaviour, it is budget cuts. So it's not so much our pay, it's more the money going into school that's causing the consternations. Of course, that's connected to pay. So anything that has to be paying conditions has to be connected to where is the money going to come from for paying conditions, because we would never want, teachers' pay to come directly out of, the budget money. That would be an absolute disaster. We actually need a separate pot of money for teachers' pay and a separate pot of money for budget. And let's be honest with you, a separate pot of money for infrastructure, because the state of our schools. But that's a bigger issue that the unions are going to have to argue for. But they've been mandated now by the union to take that step. That's going through the motion. That's what their next step is going to be, to see what the government comes up with, and then respond to that with, if that's rejected by the members, then push forward. Now, I think that's going to be a tough gig to get that 50% up to about 60% and about 80 to 90%. Yes, can be done, but I think now the hope would be if the government come out with hardball and come out with lots of insults and lots of teachers suck it up, kind of, you're all in it together. That may backfire. That may backfire and motivate the teaching profession into a kind of a stinging action of, you've insulted us. The problem we've got, of course, the NASUWT have not voted. So again, it would be beholden upon one union. And I don't know where the head teachers unions are in this. I suspect that they were voting to strike last time. However, I don't know where their current polling is at. The support staff is still interesting because they're still their ballot's still open. So it'll be interesting to see what support staff with the NEU membership vote for, because they're still actually engaged in their indicative ballot. They were 4% short last time. They were 46%, not 50%. So they didn't get the percentage last time. But I think that was, I'm going to say mistake, but I'd like to hope that might be higher, because I know that support staff is, and there's a crisis in teaching, but I would be honest with you, there's a bigger crisis, I think, definitely in TAs and support staff.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next story in a minute. And just before we do that, if we just say a quick hello to John Katz, because this show has been brought to you in partnership with John Katz Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Visit johnkatzbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy readings. And I've literally had this conversation with my head of department today about getting some kind of resources in, and we went through the catalogue of John Katz, and there's a whole plethora of stuff that you can get hold of to advance your own development. So we're going to move on to our next story, which is the Amanda Spielman's appearance on the Rachel Johnson's podcast. And we're going to be debating
outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Quite good, isn't this? Brent being muted, and then the little clips coming in. We'll make it more slick as we go on. It's our first attempt. I still think it's going relatively well so far, Brent. Again, this seems to be a thing now when people kind of leave positions. That they're either hosting a podcast, or they're going on podcasts, or they're doing the big kind of piece in the newspapers. But this was particularly interesting because obviously Amanda decided to go onto the Rachel Johnson podcast. Under the podcast is about kind of difficult women, or women that are strong women who have had kind of, difficult situations they've had to overcome. So she obviously chosen that platform, particularly to kind of make a particular case. Going back to our back catalogs, we had a fantastic podcast on the unfortunate, death that after an Ofsted inspection. Please go back and listen to that. But it's kind of in that kind of context that we are discussing. Really, was it misjudged for her to then go onto a podcast and try and explain some of the decisions that led up to that death, and also led up to the backlash around that came onto social media and the media afterwards about whether Ofsted should then abolish its rating system, the one-word rating system. So if it's possible, we could just play one of the clips from that. I think it's really interesting to hear her perspective and the way she explains it. So I don't want to say too much because I don't want to kind of bias people's opinions. Just want people, if you've not heard it, if we can listen to the first clip.
But it throws up a really important example of one of the tensions that I talked about. And there is a big tension between the interests of the adults in schools and the interests of children. The whole reason that inspectorates exist is because people have recognised over the years that public services can very easily over time come to be run for the benefit of the adults in them rather than the users.
Okay, so we just take that first clip. Is she correct in what she's saying then? Are inspectorates there to make sure that organisations are not just run for the benefit of the people inside that organisation, and they are there to protect the people who basically who have a lesser voice or a less power in that situation?
No. And a pilot's job is to make sure they look after all the passengers. Yeah, women and children go into a life raft first, but the oxygen mask has to be put on to the adult, so the adult can put the oxygen mask on to the child. I think that is shameful what she's done. I think that is insulting, shameful, and trying to rewrite history. I think she's not listening. I think she's tone deaf to the fact and not taking responsibility. I criticise children these days, some of them, for not taking responsibility. I wonder where they get it from. Maybe Amanda Spielman needs to be taking some feedback. And that's the thing, we have to take feedback because we care about the children. If she cared that much about children, I don't see Ofsted's remit when it comes to healthy buildings, healthy food, and any other aspect of children's education that's health and safety orientated. We do all of that. So no, I disagree completely. That is literally, I'm sorry, that's some social Darwinian thing of like, you're the adults, you can take it. We're here for the children. And if you can't take it, then you shouldn't be working with kids. That's stiff upper lip, kind of like suck it up attitude. Just won't wash in 2020, this day and age. It'll play to a certain gallery of kind of like, well, we're just doing our job. We're just being rigorous. We're just making sure, I'm sorry, we don't break people to then say, oh, sorry, we've just broken this school, but it's all right now. We left a mess. That's not the Ofsted I recognise when I come into teaching. That's not the Ofsted that inspected me in 2010 when I was inspected the Chief Inspector for Citizenship when I was the Citizenship Coordinator. I actually found that an affirming and a very respectful and actually a very, I would say, enlightening experience where I wouldn't say enjoyed it, but I came away from it a better teacher as a result of that Ofsted inspection, which was done in partnership with me. They weren't testing my ability to do the job and seeing was I fit enough. That's social Darwinian survival of the fittest. That's not acceptable in this day and age. That's not what Ofsted's meant to be about. I think she doesn't got the memo of what her job actually is and what Ofsted's job. Yes, inspect schools, but that's some sort of Dickensian 19th century attitude just won't wash in this day and age. Her organisation was found responsible for the deaths of a head teacher. That is fact. I don't care what she says afterwards. That is an irrefutable fact. That's now an irrefutable fact. And she's going to have to learn to live with that. And I'm sorry if she can't learn to live with that and take some ownership and responsibility for it, because many head teachers are out there taking ownership and responsibility for things that are well outside their control, but we still have to do that sometimes. So as an individual, she needs to grow like we have to grow, and she needs to take someone's ownership and responsibility. And
why don't you think she's not in that role now? Why wouldn't somebody just have the empathy to put their hands up here and just say there was things we got wrong in that case?
Did she work in education? Was she a head teacher? Had she experience working in the education secretary? Has she had any education working with head? Yeah, this is the thing about people removed from it. I'm tired of ministers who have no experience in the remit that they're in. Walk in our shoes, do our job, and then tell us and criticize. I will take criticism as from individuals who I believe have the right to criticize me based upon the fact they think that criticism is fair, balanced, and right. And I will take criticism and accept criticism if I've done wrong. But I'm not there to take criticism for the sake of criticism, because an organization's job is to criticize me for the sake of criticizing me just to make sure I'm strong enough to take it. Yeah. Don't think so.
Let's just run clip 2 from the podcast.
It was deeply, deeply unpleasant, and I tried to communicate to people sort of privately to understand that Ofsted works in the same way as other inspectorates. They all inspect on behalf of users. They all are confined essentially to diagnosing. They don't have a support role. So you see Guardian headlines saying, so Ofsted's failing because it's not supporting schools. It's a bit like saying the driving test agency is failing because it's not giving people driving lessons instead of running tests.
So we've both had Ofsted many times. Started in 2005. I think we were inspected a couple of times before 2010. And I thought, I always thought, as you said, there was a supportive role. There was a very much supportive role back then. So it's obviously not how she sees, or she's, been told to see this organisation, because that very much was the remit of Ofsted, I thought. Whether it's implicit or not, that's what actually happened when an inspector came in your room. They were excellent.
I failed my driving test. My driving instructor was in the car with me. I accepted the points that were given to me by a driving instructor who I trusted that weren't going to fail me for the sake of failing me. I took responsibility for my nearly driving into another car, going the wrong direction, and 15 minutes into that driving test, realizing it failed. But what did I do? I was able to talk to the driving instructor, get the feedback from the driving instructor. They went through and said, there's your fails, there's your went wrong. Talk to my driving instructor in the car. What do I need to do? A couple of more driving lessons on that, and then go back and do the driving test and pass. That's called feedback. That's called support. So as far as she's saying about you don't get support, I think that's incorrect. The driving instructor test does support you to become a better driver, or else why would you not? So Ofsted, if she thinks Ofsted's job is not the support, then what is it there to do? Just to come into schools, wreck the school and then walk out and go, haha, thanks very much, here's a list of things, and off you go.
Well, it's really interesting the way she talks that, because there are people, for example, doctors diagnose all the time, don't they? But they don't do it as a judgment, do they? If you were a doctor about to give some, terminal diagnosis, there's a whole kind of safeguarding and well-being protocol that goes through to support the people and family, isn't there?
Building inspectors. My father's a builder. Building inspector comes to your house, inspects your house, and then they give you the list of things to tell you what you need. They tell you what you need to do. And they may even give you contact numbers. Right? A building inspector came to our house and he supported us. I could ring him up and say, okay, when this idea of inspectors come and inspectors kind of inspect and diagnose and then walk away and it's up for you. But that's the thing, isn't it? She's not taking any responsibility because she doesn't think Ofsted has got any responsibility.
No, she's adamant that she's done her job and her role there, and you can see in her voice there. I mean, the start of that clip was, I tried to explain to people, they've got this wrong. Where's the criticism coming from? Why am I getting criticised? Because I have done exactly what I was meant to do.
Because there's three words: duty of care. That's it. We've got a duty of care to the children. She's a duty of care to us. And the Department of Education has a duty of care for us. Something, again, that they neglected during the COVID crisis. Because it really sort of comes down to it. I'm not expendable. I'm not second class. I have my rights too. And so does head teachers. And so do the adults. So no disrespect to Amanda Spielman. The children are the most important thing. But that is dismissive of our concerns, our mental health, our well-being, and that is disgusting. And considering what happened, it now gives you a very close insight into the thinking which caused that. Yeah. Now, the question then is, what's going to fix that? Is obviously that Ofsted need to change.
Just before we get to that point, and very bravely, Julia Waters has stood up at many conferences, been on the media rounds, and and we heard about those kind of court cases from our podcasts about how they had to kind of listen to these kind of testimonies and listen to these inspectors kind of give their evidence. If we can just play her clip, please.
When 3 Ofsted inspectors pronounced on frankly flimsy grounds that Ruth's leadership and therefore her school were inadequate. The injustice of that one-word judgment destroyed Ruth's career, her world, and her sense of self.
Okay, so I think we just kind of take a pause there, just to kind of let that kind of wash over us. So we're back to one-word judgments. So we're back to, issue right there to say that the cruelty of that one-word judgment and the way it was handled. Well, we know from the coroner report that it did have a direct link, but Amanda Spielman doesn't seem to, and therefore the Ofsted hierarchy, I don't think, kind of agrees with that perspective from what we've heard from that podcast.
No, and that doesn't give me hope that Ofsted have learned a lesson. Now, she's no longer the head of Ofsted. I would hope that the new head of Ofsted will change that idea of what Ofsted's actual role and remit is. I'd like to know when that role and remit of Ofsted has changed, because it's not the Ofsted I recognised or had inspections of. So when did that change? When did that? Is that under Spielman herself? Is that under the government? There'll be maybe a back trail of like, this is the role of Ofsted, because my understanding is the role of Ofsted was to come in and support schools to ensure that schools got better. We have Gillian Keegan crowing about how many schools are good or outstanding and saying under her government that they've got better and all the rest of it. She herself said recently that if she was inspected at the head teachers conference, wasn't it? If she had some of the horror stories of how people were inspected, her response was quite glibly, well, I would have punched them. Yeah. Thanks for that. But punch you, they're just doing their job. So it's this kind of like, I'm sorry you don't like this job. I mean, that's like the tax collector thing. We're just taxing, like nobody likes tax collectors, but we're just doing our job. That was our job, and we did our job. So what we complain about? And that doesn't wash, because unfortunately her job was not done properly, and there were consequences. Going back to it, there were consequences to the job. The thing is, I mean, going back to the NEU conference, motion number 9, they passed a motion which basically is quite clearly abolish Ofsted. And that's the key question for me now, is we need some quality assurance. We need an organization that does quality assurance, but we need an organization that supports us. And in the current context of what's happening in teaching, our head teachers, where are we getting support? Ofsted should be an organization that should be supporting schools. If not, there needs to be a separate organization which should be supporting schools, because I think that's where the problem lies is now. Because where was the support? Where was the support for Ruth? Where was the support
for balance? Amanda Spielman does say in that podcast that she does believe actually that the inspectorate shouldn't come in at head level, a bit like when like an NHS trust gets reviewed, is that the judgment is given to the kind of board level. So it's not an isolated head on their own that receives that kind of information. So she does believe that it should be it should be aimed at a hierarchy. But again, she knows that is the system. So it's almost like saying, well, what can I do? I have to give this judgment. She's absolutely adamant that she has to give it.
No, she created the culture. When you look at a school, the person responsible for creating the culture of the school is the head teacher, because they create the culture. And Ruth Perry created a culture of the school that I'd be so proud to send my 2 children to. Absolutely, amazing school, amazing head teacher.
Yeah.
Now she took responsibility. That was her school. Amanda Spielman was in charge of an organization which culture, let's be frankly honest with you, was hothousing, destroying careers, bullying teachers. And she's basically saying, we're just doing our job. Sorry you don't like it. Sorry, we're just making sure, because we have to be rigorous because it's for the children. We're just making sure that the children are safe. Seriously? Is that the defense? The defense is, I'm sorry, we have to do this. I know it's really horrible. I know it's like paying taxes. We don't want to do it, but we have to do it for the sake of the children. We have to inspect. I get that. That's partially true. But do you have to do it the way you did it?
Yeah.
The culture the culture that you insisted upon. I'm sorry, no. There was a better way, and we know what the better way was when Ofsted came in. And Ofsted came in, talked to schools, took the context into consideration, and showed humanity. They showed empathy. They showed context and understanding. Unfortunately, they're symptomatic of what's happened in education being data-led and corporate. And that's just cold. That's so cold. And that's not what education is. Education is not cold. Education is about relationships. Relationships with head teachers, relationships with board of governors, relationships with your maths, relationships with Ofsted. What is the relationship to Ofsted at the moment? Culture of fear, mistrust. I'm sorry. I agree with my union on this. It needs either massively overhauled, or I would back that motion to just abolish the whole organisation in the first place.
Yeah.
Unless there's a massive change, and unless there's a massive culture change. But if that's the outgoing culture, it'd be really interesting to see what the new culture is.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes full circle to where we started tonight. Should Daniel Kebede, etc., be more kind of public about these issues? Should it be kind of really kind of nailed down that you turn on the TV, on the social medias, wherever, where it's really clear where the union stands on these issues?
That is clear. It's emotional conference, and
I understand what you're saying, but you're talking very much as that kind of sorry to use the term, a bit more kind of on the militant side of the union wing.
Proactive.
I get on a better word, yeah, proactive side. But we discussed, didn't we, that there are a number of people that are not so active for whatever reason, and that's their choice. It might be because they've just not been brought up in a culture. And they've been brought up in a culture, where unions were, vilified for certain generations, and therefore they've grown up in households where their parents have been talking about, the 70s, these unions should stop the country. They've had to grow up in that culture. So if it was clear where the unions were on those types of issues, maybe they wouldn't be so criticised on the other side. They would say
they are. They would say that if you look at their NEU press releases, the problem is the media doesn't want. How do you get traction? How do you get notice? It's it needs to be in political manifestos. The largest party in opposition doesn't want to abolish Ofsted. They just want to get rid of 1-1 judgments.
Yeah.
So there's where it, this is where to support a little bit of what you're saying is you have to affect change by affecting the change makers.
Yeah.
And you have to get into the decision-making cycle with the people who have the power, and the people who currently have the power are the current government. And unions aren't having much impact on they. But the question is, what relationship are they building with a potential future Labour government? That might be. And equally, how important is this when you're cutting through the culture woke wars and what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in things. And to go back to the earlier point, and then this is where I disagree with my union, when you're putting in your fringes and when you're putting in about Ukraine and all the rest of it, and that's good to have those debates. The problem is your press, your individuals in the press who are fishing and are looking for stories will go to that and ignore motion number 9. So to back up what you're saying is motion number 9 there, which is abolish Ofsted from the unions, is lost in the ether of all the other traffic, and of course then the culture wars, and then what's the union saying about Ukraine? What's the union's position on that? Which actually, when you look at the conference, was fringe events. This was a motion passed on the conference floor coming from the grassroots, but it hasn't carried to the general populace. It hasn't made the cut through. I suppose that's the weakness. When you're a large organisation, you've got all these issues to deal with. You almost need. And Tom Rogers said that ages ago. It was like, we're fighting on paying conditions. Our issues are broader than paying conditions, but we can only go on strike in paying conditions. If I go on strike, some people did actually, didn't they? Not let Ofsted into their school. What can you actually do? But collectively, this needs the teaching profession to rally around a political organisation or push the union to put this higher up the agenda. That's where it's got to come from. Yeah. And I think that hasn't cut through yet, because there isn't that massive call, is there? There was that call when Ruth died, wasn't there? But that's dying down now again, isn't it? Yeah. And I don't see that there is enough push to either reform Ofsted enough, because what I can see is deck chairs being moving in the Titanic. I don't see a massive shift. And the big listens happening at the moment, isn't it? With the
big talk or whatever it's called.
Right.
So we always knew it was going to be difficult, Brent. And Tom Rogers said that an hours was tight for Brent, and he's done well to kind of curtail himself. Just quickly, then, let's do a yes or no. Should the education unions discuss geopolitical affairs?
They should, but they should not.
Yes or no?
Yeah, but no, don't you put me on nuanced? Yes, they should, but they need to.
Okay. I'm going to go no. I can get Tom to meet me.
No.
Was Amanda Spielman's appearance on Rachel Johnson's podcast misjudged? Yes.
Massively.
Big one, yeah. And who's right? Ofsted on abolishing Ofsted, Julia Waters, or the NEU? They're kind of both right, aren't they? Really, they're kind of they're both about abolishing. So as you can see, you can apply to do this if you've been inspired by our performance on our first show. To apply to be a show, you do your own show on Teacher Talk Radio. You can use that code to scan for more information. We've also got a show coming up on the 8th. About well-being from the guys at Teach Well Toolkits, which is fantastic. Again, you've got a QR code to link there, and you can see that it's on all the normal platforms and live on Spaces as well, which is fantastic. This show was brought to you in partnership with John Catt's Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Please visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading. Woo! Show 1 done. Look at that, dead on 9 o'clock. True pros.
Well, I can keep going. No, the one last point. Obviously, Kevin and Mary got the recognition.
This is the one point then that goes on till 10 o'clock.
Yeah, those are no. Kevin and Mary Bush, they got their recognition at the union conference. It was good to see that. And although we talked about earlier on, Kevin was tweeting about the Palestinian sort of ambassador speaking at the NU conference, which again would court controversy. It's interesting that, you know, during the crisis, the COVID crisis, which I have to say I fell in love with that union a lot more because they were supporting and they were standing up for education, and I think they came into their own. And I think Kevin and Mary came into their own as two leaders, but they got their recognitions, and it's good to see that. And they're collectively, you know, the teaching profession does need people to stand together. And I'd hope that if people do disagree with what my views are, they're more than welcome to contact me. I would stand solidarity with anybody in the teaching profession and teaching unions. And what the connection to all of those stories, and tonight is of course that's what happened with Ruth as well. That we have to stand together. We have to look after each other. We have to look after people in our profession, because there are fewer and fewer, getting less and less. And certainly if people want to go through unions to do that, they can. But equally, you don't have to be a member of a union. You should reach out to your colleagues. That was the one thing on my behaviour survey I did in my school. I asked, where do you get your support from? And I was proud to say that, you know, half of my colleagues said they get support from the union. But the top answer was a trusted colleague in the profession. Was 95% of my colleagues said that they can trust one of their colleagues. So regardless of our disagreements, regardless of our political views, we are all in education because we care, and we're all in education because. And what we didn't cover tonight, we'll have a chance to cover in our time, is the shutting down of debate on things like Israel-Palestine, which we will cover, yeah.
Okay,
yeah, we'll do it next week. But thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you very much. Yeah, all the best. Look after yourselves. Goodbye.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused